The death of my son was met with a chilling response from my daughter-in-law, Lorraine, with a coldness that startled me. She told me to stop being so dramatic, get my things together, and figure out how to get by on my own. For 2 weeks, I was forced to live in my car, struggling with the bitter cold and the shame of my new circumstances. My life changed in an instant when I received a surprising call from my son's lawyer. He revealed a hidden clause that contained $8 million. The words were a physical shock. Lorraine stood in the living room, a space that had been my home for 3 years. With new keys clutched in her hand, she informed me that the house now belonged to her, and I needed to gather my things and leave. The declaration was so forceful that it made me stagger back, grasping the doorframe to keep from falling. I was so confused. "Lorraine, what are you even talking about? We just laid Chris to rest this very afternoon." She moved aside, revealing several cardboard boxes filled with my belongings. They were already packed and sitting by the window. She said that now that Chris was gone, her charity work was over. I immediately recognized the handwriting on the boxes as my father's from decades ago. They contained things like my tools and old winter clothes. I realized with a jolt that she had been preparing this ambush while I was away at my son's funeral. She had packed up all my things while I grieved. I tried to reason with her, asking for a little time to get my life in order. But she said my time was up the moment Chris died, and that I would have to figure out how to get by on my own. Her words cut deep. For 3 years, I had been living there, slowly recovering from a stroke, and I had truly believed it was my home. Every room, from the guest room where I regained my strength to the kitchen where Chris and I used to eat breakfast on Sundays, suddenly felt unfamiliar. A knock on the front door brought me out of my shock. Lorraine's expression turned sinister as she opened it. "Stephen, you're right on time," she said. A man I recognized from Chris's business dinners, Stephen, walked in, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expensive coat that was lightly dusted with snow. He carefully avoided my gaze as he placed some legal papers on the coffee table. He calmly informed me that the paperwork had been legally filed, and I had only 30 minutes to get my things and leave the house. My voice broke as I asked how I could possibly do that after living there for 3 years. "You were just a guest," Lorraine insisted. "Chris's guest." She told me the house was now hers, and I was trespassing. Stephen, still refusing to look at me, adjusted his glasses and explained that Chris's will had been probated the day before and that Lorraine had inherited everything, so her actions were completely legal. My head began to spin. It dawned on me that while I was grieving and picking out flowers for my son's funeral, she had already been working to secure everything for herself. The packed boxes suddenly made perfect sense. She knew exactly how long she had until everything was official. I asked where I was supposed to go. "That's not my problem," she answered, picking up one of the boxes, an old photograph of my father visible on top. "Figure it out for yourself like everyone else." She took it outside and dropped it onto the concrete with a loud crash that echoed in the cold air. The photograph shattered, and I scrambled to gather the pieces of my father's smiling face. He was in his old Navy uniform. As I worked, Lorraine came back for another box. I followed her, insisting that this was crazy and Chris never would have wanted this to happen. She just repeated that Chris was dead. She threw another box down, and my medications scattered across the driveway. She said she was done pretending to care about her husband's broken-down father. Her words stung, but her lack of emotion was what truly frightened me. She was so efficient, and there was no hesitation. This was not grief, it was pure calculation. She had been preparing for this for a long time. Soon after, Stephen came out with more boxes and started putting them in the trunk of my Honda Civic. Chris had bought me the car after my stroke because I couldn't drive my old truck anymore. It was now my only safe place. As they put boxes in the back seat, I begged them to just let me stay until I could find somewhere else to go. Lorraine said no and slammed the car door, saying I had 3 years of free rent and it was time for me to fend for myself. I watched as a bottle of my medication rolled under the car, and I got down on my knees to get it, my arthritic joints groaning in protest. When I stood up, Stephen was holding out a business card, quietly suggesting a temporary solution at a storage facility. Lorraine quickly snatched the card away from him, saying I did not need solutions, I needed to leave. She tossed the final box into the car without care. It held my stroke therapy equipment, including the resistance bands and grip strengtheners that had helped me relearn how to write. Its contents spilled across the seat. "Give me the keys," she demanded. I handed my house key over, my fingers feeling numb. She tested it in the lock, then put it in her purse. That small gesture was more final than anything else she had done. She warned me that she would call the police if I wasn't gone in 5 minutes. With my hands shaking, I got into the Honda and started the engine. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw Lorraine closing the door to the house that had been my home. I heard the new locks click into place. The car rolled away from the curb and into the dark February night. I had nowhere to go. My car's engine hummed as I drove through the empty streets of Denver, and the shock began to fade, replaced by a harsh reality. It was 9 o'clock at night, and I had nowhere to sleep. The heater in my car was barely working, and I had already wasted an hour driving around aimlessly, using up gas I could not afford to replace. I decided to park at the Walmart on East Evans. The bright lights, security cameras, and other cars in the lot made it feel safe. I parked in the back, far from the entrance, but close enough to feel secure. The car seat only reclined about 30 degrees, and my back was already aching. The 15th of February became the longest night of my life. I slept in short bursts, waking up every hour or so to start the engine just to get some heat. Around 3 in the morning, a young security guard tapped on my window. He was probably a college student working the night shift. He asked if I was okay or if I was having car trouble. I lied, telling him I was waiting for a tow truck. He nodded and left, but I knew I couldn't stay there for much longer. By the time morning came, my neck felt completely stiff and my left leg was numb. The effects of my stroke were always at their worst when I couldn't move around freely. The McDonald's on Colfax opened at 6 a.m. So I went there, ordered some coffee, and used their restroom to wash my face and brush my teeth in the small sink. A stranger stared back at me in the mirror, a man with stubble, hollow eyes, and the same funeral clothes from the day before. The woman who was cleaning the tables kept looking at me with what I felt was pity. The social services office downtown did not open until 9 a.m. I spent 3 hours in their waiting room, watching as younger people with kids were helped before me. Finally, a tired woman with kind eyes looked over my file. She explained that there was a 3-month waiting list for senior housing and that the emergency shelters had strict rules. I would have to leave by 7 in the morning and not return until after 5 in the evening, with no place to store my belongings. 3 months seemed like an eternity. I had only about $200 in cash and my car full of my things. My medications alone cost $60 a month, and I would need to pay for gas just to survive. I asked if there was any kind of temporary solution. She began to explain the family assistance programs, but stopped when she saw my file, apologizing and saying that my son had been my only family contact. As I walked back to the car, memories overwhelmed me. I thought of Chris at 25, so nervous about starting his own consulting business. I had given him $15,000 from my retirement fund, everything I had saved, to help him pay for his first office in the Lodo district. He hugged me that day and promised he would pay me back. He never did, not because he was ungrateful, but because we both understood that it wasn't a loan, it was an investment in his future. And now that future was gone. On the second night, I went to a different Walmart in Aurora, hoping to avoid running into the same security guard. This time, I parked my car between 2 trucks so it would be less visible. I was worried about my car battery. I knew that repeatedly starting the engine just for heat would eventually drain it completely, and I had no money for a jump start. I rationed the heat, running it for 15 minutes every hour. My joints were getting stiff from the cold, and I was running out of the medication that had been scattered all over the driveway. Sleep came in small fragments between shivering fits. On February 17th, I came to an even worse conclusion. Surviving on McDonald's dollar menu was not going to work. My last $20 bill had to last me for several more days for gas and food. I bought a single hamburger and sat in my car, making it last for an entire hour. Another memory came to me. I thought back to Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, when Lorraine had been sick with the flu for 3 weeks while Chris was away on a business trip. I took care of her. I made her soup, helped her with her medications, and even helped her shower when she was too weak to stand on her own. She had thanked me then, with tears in her eyes, calling me her hero. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who had thrown my belongings into the street. By February 18th, desperation led me to try calling her. I thought that maybe if I explained my situation and appealed to whatever humanity she had left, she would help. I was met with a pre-recorded message saying the number had been blocked by the subscriber. It had not been disconnected, it had been blocked. She had anticipated my call and cut off that option as well. I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't just grief or stress. This was a calculated plan to remove me from her new life. As I sat in the McDonald's parking lot, I realized that Lorraine had not acted on a whim. She had planned this entire eviction while my son's body was still warm. Every detail had been calculated, and every path had been sealed off. This realization brought with it a feeling I had not expected, not despair, but clarity. For the first time since Chris died, my mind felt sharp and focused instead of foggy. The initial shock was fading, and something stronger was taking its place. I started my car and drove toward the Denver Public Library. It would be open in the morning, and I would be able to think properly in the warmth, research my options, and find out what rights I might have. But as I settled into my car seat for another sleepless night, I made myself a promise. Lorraine believed she had destroyed a broken old man. She was about to find out that she had awakened something else entirely. The central branch of the Denver Public Library became a refuge for me. It was warm and quiet, with public computers and a bathroom that felt luxurious after spending 3 days in my car. I got there when the doors opened at 10 in the morning and found a corner table. I began researching what Lorraine had done. I found that Colorado inheritance law was complex, but the rules were clear. As Chris's widow, she would automatically inherit everything unless he had made specific arrangements. Community property laws meant the house, his investments, and even his business were all hers. But something about that just didn't sit right with me. My son had always been so careful about everything, especially his finances. He had shown me his insurance papers and investment statements, always making sure to explain his planning. It seemed strange that he would not have made sure I was protected somehow. The library's legal database gave me access to public records. I searched for Chris's will, but the probate filing only had basic information. Lorraine was the sole beneficiary, and the estate was valued at $2.3 million. The house alone was worth $800,000. My son had been far more successful and wealthy than I had ever imagined. Around noon, my stomach started to cramp from hunger. I walked next door to McDonald's, where a $5 meal was all I could afford for the day. As I ate slowly, trying to make the meal last, I saw a business card in my wallet. It was for a lawyer named Howard, and it specialized in family law and estate planning. It was not Stephen's card. I went back to the library computers and looked up Howard's firm. It was a well-known firm with a great reputation that specialized in complex family trusts. I wondered why Chris would have used 2 different lawyers. The afternoon was filled with more questions. Chris's business, Kellogg Solutions, had been started with a partner named David. I found their website, which showed an impressive list of clients and offices in downtown Denver. The probate filing said that Lorraine now owned Chris's full share. I wondered if David knew about this and if he was okay with having a new business partner. By the time the library was closing, my mind was spinning with all the possibilities. There were too many things that did not make sense. My son had always been a private person about his business, but he had always been so protective of me. He had helped me with my stroke recovery and had insisted I live with him while I healed. This did not seem like the kind of man who would just leave his father homeless. My 4th night in the car was the coldest one yet. A snow flurry on February 19th coated my windshield, and I felt even more trapped. But the cold could not take away the sharpness I was feeling. The fog of my grief was lifting, and I was beginning to feel something I had not felt in years: purpose. On Friday morning, I was back at the library right when they opened. This time, I researched Stephen's firm. It focused on high-end divorce law, asset protection, and some corporate work, but nothing related to family estate planning. I wondered why Lorraine would have chosen him over Howard. A thought hit me like a lightning bolt. What if Chris had kept certain arrangements private? Business owners sometimes create separate trusts to protect assets from their spouses, especially if they have concerns about their marriage. I looked deeper into Kellogg Solutions and found partnership agreements that had been filed with the state. The language was very technical, but one clause stood out. It mentioned provisions for the death of a partner that seemed to protect ongoing operations from estate inheritance. My heart began to pound. If Chris had set things up carefully, Lorraine might not have everything she thought she did. Around lunchtime, I made a decision that both scared and excited me. I used the library phone to call Howard's office. A person from the company answered, and I explained that I was Norman and believed my son Chris was a client of the firm. There was a pause, and then the person on the phone asked me to hold. The wait lasted for 2 minutes. When the receptionist returned to the line, her voice had changed completely. She told me that Mr. Howard wanted to see me right away and asked if I was available that afternoon. I said yes, but I needed to mention that I did not have any money to pay for legal fees. "That won't be necessary, sir," she said, and asked if I could be there at 2 p.m. My hands were shaking as I agreed and hung up the phone. Whatever this was, it was important enough for Howard to see me right away and waive his fee. This meant that Chris had left specific instructions for me. The walk to Howard's office took me about 30 minutes through downtown Denver. I stopped at a gas station bathroom and tried to clean up. I had been wearing the same clothes for 4 days, but I still wanted to look presentable. The man in the mirror was still broken, but there was something awakening in my eyes. Lorraine thought she had won, that she had completely destroyed me. She was about to find out that underestimating me was the biggest mistake she had ever made. I was reviewing some notes about inheritance law when the library phone rang at 10 a.m. I almost did not answer it. I was so focused. Who would call me here? But something made me grab the receiver. A man said he was David and was relieved to have found me. He was Chris's business partner, and I had not heard from him since the funeral. I asked him how he had found me. He told me that a mutual friend said I might be there. His voice was filled with a mix of genuine concern and business efficiency. He told me he had just heard about my situation and that it was terrible. His words hit me harder than I expected. Someone actually cared about what was happening to me. I got right to the point, telling him I needed Howard's address. The last 3 days had taught me to focus only on what was essential. He said, "Of course," and then asked where I was staying and if I needed any help right away. I explained my situation, and I could feel the other library patrons pretending not to listen. The silence on his end stretched uncomfortably long. He finally said it was unconscionable and that Chris would be furious. He said he would cover Howard's contact information, but that I would need proper clothes for the meeting. He suggested I go to a Goodwill on East Colfax. About 30 minutes later, I was standing at the bus stop with directions and $40 that David had insisted on transferring to my account. The gesture meant more to me than the money. It was proof that I was not completely alone. The bus ride took about 20 minutes, taking me through neighborhoods that I hardly recognized. The city of Denver had changed so much in the last 3 years, becoming more expensive and more polished. The Goodwill store was now in a building that had once been a small department store. Its windows held the second-hand hope of those whose lives had been disrupted and whose possessions had been abandoned. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the smell of fabric softener mixed with something sad and unidentifiable. I found the men's section and began my search for a bit of dignity. A navy suit hung between a sports coat and a winter parka, both of which were too large for my body. But the suit looked different. It was well-made and hardly worn, probably donated by someone's estate. I held it up against my chest to check the measurements. An elderly clerk approached and with a gentle smile said, "That's a good choice. Its quality will blend, and it should serve you well for important occasions." I had not had one of those in years. I went into the changing room and carefully studied my reflection. The suit fit better than I had expected. It transformed me from a homeless man into someone who belonged in a professional setting. The fabric was firm and made my posture straighter. It was more than just a suit. For the first time since my son's death, I felt like Norman again. I felt like the man who had raised a successful son, who had built engines with my own 2 hands, and who had earned respect in my small part of the world. I paid $14 for the suit, leaving me with enough money to get back to the library on the bus. The purchase felt more like an investment than an expense. That evening, I found a quiet corner at McDonald's and practiced for my meeting with Howard. I wrote down the key points on napkins, including what to tell him about Lorraine's actions, how to present my situation without sounding desperate, and questions I had about Chris's business arrangements. The bathroom mirror became my rehearsal space. I practiced introducing myself, explaining what had happened, and asking for guidance. Each time I repeated my words, I felt stronger. I spent all of February 23rd preparing. I researched Howard's law firm online, memorized the address, and planned my route. The Denver Public Library had become my home base. Its computers and quiet spaces allowed me to think strategically for the first time in weeks. By February 24th, I felt ready. My Goodwill suit was hanging in the back of my car, pressed and ready for the next day. My questions were organized, and my presentation had been rehearsed. The desperation I had felt was now replaced with a sense of purpose I had almost forgotten. Standing in the library parking lot that evening, I called Howard's office and scheduled an appointment for the next afternoon. The receptionist's professional and courteous tone reminded me that I was no longer invisible. Tomorrow would bring answers, and tonight, I allowed myself to hope. Howard's office was on the third floor of an old brick building in Lodo. Its tall windows looked out over the historic district where Chris had started his business years ago. I got there 15 minutes early, wearing my new suit and carrying myself like a man with a reason to be there. The receptionist, who was about the same age as Lorraine, greeted me with kindness. She said that Howard was expecting me and asked if I would like some coffee while I waited. Coffee, Real coffee, in a ceramic mug. I gratefully accepted and sat down in a leather chair that made me think of better times. Howard came out at exactly 2 o'clock. He was a distinguished-looking man in his late 50s with kind eyes and silver hair behind wire-rimmed glasses. But his expression changed the moment he saw me. He walked toward me with a look of concern and said my condition shocked him. He asked me to come into his office immediately. His office looked like it had been built from decades of success. It had beautiful wood furniture, legal books lining the walls, and personal photographs that showed a family and community man. He led me to a sitting area away from his desk. He told me to tell him everything that had happened. I began to explain about Lorraine's ambush, the cruelty of her timing, the days of living in my car, my disappointment with social services, and the systematic destruction of my dignity. Howard listened without interrupting. With every detail, his face grew darker. I told him that she had thrown me out like garbage and changed the locks while I was at my son's funeral. He was silent for a long moment, and then walked to a large safe in the corner of his office. He opened it with practiced ease. He said that my son was a very smart and forward-thinking man. He took out a sealed envelope that had Chris's familiar handwriting on it. My heart began to beat faster as he said that Chris had anticipated that difficulties might arise after his death, the kind of difficulties that would require careful planning and legal protection. Howard returned to his seat and held the envelope as if it were a sacred document. He said that Chris had left specific, very specific, instructions about my well-being. The air in the room was charged with possibility. I held my breath as I asked what kind of instructions. He said that Chris had planned for multiple possibilities, including that his widow might not feel a sense of family obligation. Howard placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. He said that the document he had filed with the probate court was only a part of my son's estate planning. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Only part. I repeated. But first, he said, we needed to address my current situation. Howard stood up and walked to his desk. He took out a business card and said that his mother, Edith, lived in a guest house by Cherry Creek Reservoir. She was 83 years old and as sharp as a tack. He said she was always complaining about rattling around in the house by herself. He handed me the card, and on the back was an address. He said she would be delighted to have a responsible gentleman as a house guest while we sorted through my son's arrangements, and that there would be no charge. He said she valued company more than she valued money. I looked at the card, completely overwhelmed by this sudden change of fortune. I said I did not know what to say. Howard told me to say that I would accept help when it was offered. He sat down again, his expression serious. He said that Chris was worried about leaving me unprotected and that he had spent a lot of time making sure that would not happen. I asked when I would be able to learn the details. He said it would be soon, but that certain legal procedures had to be followed. He also said he suspected that Lorraine would not accept the revelations gracefully. With a bit of a smile, he said we would have a formal reading once all parties were properly notified. I left Howard's office with directions to the guest house and a feeling I had not had in weeks, genuine hope. It was not the desperate optimism of a drowning man, but the steady confidence of someone who finally had allies. The drive to Cherry Creek took 30 minutes, and the roads wound through the hills overlooking the reservoir. Edith's property was on a private road lined with cottonwood trees. The main house was beautiful but inviting, and the guest cottage was a perfect sanctuary for me. When I knocked on the door, it was opened by a small woman with white hair and eyes that saw everything. She immediately said that I must be Norman and stepped aside to let me in. She told me that Howard had called ahead and that she had fresh coffee brewing and that dinner would be ready in an hour. She said that she would get me settled properly. For the first time since my son's death, I felt like I was home. 3 days at Edith's guest house had done more than just restore my dignity. It had awakened a sense of purpose I thought Lorraine had destroyed forever. On the morning of February 28th, I was sitting at the small kitchen table going over the notes that Howard had given me. I heard the crunch of gravel as a silver car pulled into the driveway and parked aggressively, blocking the entire drive. I saw Lorraine get out of the car, her designer coat whipping in the wind. She was on a warpath toward the cottage. "Norman," she yelled with a tone of authority, "get out here. We need to talk." Edith came out of the main house, her 83-year-old body radiating protective anger. I stepped outside, wearing clean clothes and a confidence that clearly surprised Lorraine. "Hello, Lorraine," I said. "You're trespassing on private property." She replied that I should not dare lecture her about property rights. She advanced until we were 3 feet apart, her face red with fury. She said, "You think you can outsmart me, old man? Everything belongs to me. Everything." I calmly told her that we would have to see what her husband had to say about that. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I had not possessed weeks ago. Her expression changed from anger to fear disguised as rage. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I told her it meant exactly what it sounded like and calmly folded my arms. I said that Chris was very thorough in his business dealings. Very thorough. Edith approached from the main house. Her white hair was perfectly styled, and she moved with the dignity of someone who was accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Young lady," she said, "you're disturbing my guest with your shouting. Please lower your voice or leave my property immediately." Lorraine turned on her, completely abandoning any pretense of respect. "Your guest? This pathetic old fool belongs in a nursing home, not playing house with strangers." Edith's voice was like ice as she replied, "That pathetic old fool served his country, raised a successful son, and deserves basic human decency. Qualities you seem to lack entirely." Lorraine told her to stay out of it, saying it was family business. Edith told her that I was her guest, which made it her business. She stood between us in a protective gesture that would have seemed comical if not for the steel in her voice. "And I am not your grandmother, young woman," she said. Thank goodness. Lorraine's composure broke completely. She told us we had no idea what we were dealing with, and said she had lawyers and court orders. She said she would bury us all in legal paperwork. I calmly told her to bring her lawyers and her court orders, that we would be ready. The certainty in my voice stopped her in her tracks. For 3 weeks, she had faced a broken man who begged for mercy. Now she was faced with someone who knew things she didn't, someone who had allies and resources she had not anticipated. "What do you know?" she hissed. "What did that fool husband of mine tell you?" I admitted that he had not told me anything, but that he had told his lawyers quite a lot. Her eyes widened as the meaning of what I said sunk in. My son was meticulous about business documents. He was obsessive about protecting assets and planning for contingencies. If he had suspected problems in his marriage, it all made perfect sense. "You're bluffing," she said. "Chris trusted me completely." I corrected her, saying that Chris loved her and that trust and love were not always the same thing. She backed away toward her car, her confidence gone. "This isn't over," she said. "When I'm finished with you, you'll wish you had stayed in that parking lot where you belonged." "Perhaps," I replied, "but I won't be facing you alone." Lorraine slammed the car door and backed out of the driveway with an unnecessary amount of violence, spraying gravel against the cottage windows. We watched until her taillights disappeared around the bend. "Well," Edith said, smoothing her hair, "that was enlightening. Your daughter-in-law has a vocabulary that would embarrass a sailor." I found myself smiling. I was actually smiling for the first time since my son's funeral. I told her that Lorraine was no longer my daughter-in-law because she had made that very clear 3 weeks ago. I wondered what she would do next. "Panic," I said with a sense of satisfaction. "And panicked people make mistakes." Edith nodded in agreement. She said that Howard had taught her to appreciate a good strategy. She asked me if I wanted more coffee, saying we would need our strength for what was to come. As we walked back toward the cottage, I realized something important had changed. 3 weeks ago, Lorraine had destroyed the victim, Norman. Today, she had met his adversary. The conference room at Howard's office felt different this time. It was formal, and it was charged with a legal seriousness. On March 3rd, at exactly 3 o'clock, all parties sat at the polished mahogany table. Lorraine was wearing her best black suit and radiating confidence. Stephen was at her side with his briefcase open and his legal pads ready. I sat across from them, wearing my Goodwill suit, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. Howard opened the proceedings with professional ease. He said we were there for the formal reading of Chris's last will and testament, dated September 15, 2023. The date surprised me. Chris had updated his will only 5 months ago during what I had thought was a happy time in his marriage. Howard continued to read from the official documents, saying that the primary bequests were straightforward. The house on Cherry Creek Drive, along with all the furnishings and personal effects, would go to Lorraine. All the business assets of Kellogg Solutions would also be transferred to her as the sole proprietor. Lorraine's smile was sinister. She had won everything significant, just as she had expected. Howard then announced that I would receive a monthly stipend of $800 from a designated pension fund, which would be sufficient for modest accommodations. $800 was barely enough for a studio apartment and groceries. Lorraine believed her victory was now complete. She turned to me with unconcealed satisfaction. She said that she hoped this would settle any of my delusions about challenging her inheritance. Stephen nodded in approval and began to organize his papers. But Howard remained seated, his expression carefully neutral. He said that there was one additional matter. He took a sealed envelope from his safe. He said that Chris had left specific instructions for a private consultation with me regarding supplementary arrangements. The energy in the room shifted. Stephen's head snapped up from his legal pads. He demanded to know what supplementary arrangements were and said that they had the right to know about all estate provisions. Howard's voice had the authority of decades of legal practice. He said that Colorado law permitted private bequests and personal consultations. This envelope, he explained, was addressed specifically to me for individual review. Lorraine's confident expression faltered. She called my inheritance ridiculous and wondered what Chris could have possibly left me. Stephen's professional instincts sensed danger. He said, "This is unacceptable. Full disclosure is required for proper estate administration." Howard did not move. He said that the primary will had been read in full compliance with the law and that this additional document pertained to a personal matter between a father and son and that privacy laws applied. Lorraine stood up abruptly, and her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. She said she would not allow secret arrangements to undermine her inheritance. Howard calmly replied that her inheritance remained exactly as stated. He explained that this consultation would not affect the primary will. The distinction was subtle but important. Whatever Chris had planned was separate from the main estate. Lorraine understood the meaning, even if she could not articulate it. Stephen demanded to know when the consultation would take place. Howard said it would happen immediately for those who wished to stay. His meaning was clear. Everyone else should leave. Lorraine gathered her purse with quick, angry movements. She said, "This isn't finished, Norman. I'll discover what games you're playing." I quietly told her I was not playing games, but was simply honoring my son's wishes. Stephen angrily stuffed his papers into his briefcase. He said they would be monitoring the situation and any irregularities would be challenged immediately. They left together, and I heard the angry clicking of Lorraine's heels as she went down the hallway. I watched through the window as they argued beside Stephen's car before driving away separately. Howard waited until the sound of their cars faded before we moved to the comfortable chairs away from the table. The shift felt symbolic, from legal proceedings to a personal consultation. He held the sealed envelope with a sense of reverence. He said my son was a remarkable man and that his planning had taken months of careful preparation. My hands were shaking as I took the envelope from him. Chris's handwriting on it simply said, "For Dad when justice is required." The sealed envelope felt heavier than it should have. Howard went to the window to give me some privacy. I carefully broke the seal, revealing several documents and what looked like a memory card. The letter on top had yesterday's date in Chris's precise handwriting. It said, "Dad, if you're reading this, my suspicions about Lorraine were correct. I am so sorry I could not confront her directly. She is more dangerous than you realize. Instead, I created a financial scheme to protect you from her final blow." My breath caught. Final blow. He knew something terrible was coming. The letter continued. 2 years ago, I started to notice changes in Lorraine's behavior. Little things, questions about my business, a sudden interest in estate planning, and conversations with divorce lawyers she thought I didn't know about. I hired a private investigator and found out she had been planning to take everything and abandon you the moment I died. His words were a physical blow to me. 2 years. He had known for 2 years and had not said anything. I could not prove her intentions legally, the letters said, but I could prepare for them. The main will gives her everything she expects, the house, the business, enough to satisfy her greed. But I moved the real assets to an offshore account through a series of complex financial documents. $8 million, Dad. It can only be accessed with biometric identification that only you have. $8 million. My mind could not process the number. Howard quietly came over. Would you like me to explain the technical arrangements? He asked. I nodded, still reeling from the revelation. My son had been protecting me from a devastation I never saw coming. Howard sat in the chair beside me. He explained that Chris had spent 18 months creating a financial structure that was unbreakable. It involved Swiss banks, Cayman accounts, and legal trusts spanning multiple jurisdictions. The beauty of it, he said, is its simplicity. Everything requires your fingerprint and a retinal scan for access. She cannot touch it. She doesn't even know it exists. The main estate she inherited is only about 10% of Chris's actual wealth. The rest belongs to you now. I returned to the letter, my vision blurring with tears. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, it said. I had hoped my suspicions were wrong, that Lorraine might have been worthy of the love I offered her. But I could not risk your security on a hope. You sacrificed everything for my success. Your retirement fund, your dreams, your independence. This is my way of making sure you never have to depend on anyone else's kindness again. The memory of giving Chris $15,000, my entire life savings, came back to me. He had never forgotten that sacrifice. There's more, Howard said softly, holding out a small device. He recorded a video message for this moment. The screen flickered to life. My son was sitting there, speaking directly to the camera with the same intensity one remembered from his business presentations. Dad, he said, forgive me for hiding the truth about Lorraine. Watching her manipulate you while planning your destruction was the hardest thing I've ever endured. But this scheme will protect you from her final blow and give you power she never anticipated. His image paused, then continued with visible emotion. I love you more than I could ever express. You taught me everything about honor, sacrifice, and protecting family. Now it's my turn to protect you. The video ended, leaving silence broken only by my ragged breathing. Howard waited patiently as I processed the overwhelming magnitude of my son's gift. What happens next? I finally managed. Tomorrow, we visit the bank. The primary safety deposit box contains access codes and additional instructions. But, Norman, Howard's expression grew serious. This isn't just about money. Chris left you tools for psychological warfare. He wanted you to have every advantage when facing her. I folded the letter, understanding for the first time that my son's love had reached beyond death to transform me from victim to victor. Then let's give Lorraine exactly what she deserves. Howard drove me to the First National Bank downtown the next morning. His luxury sedan was a stark contrast to my usual Honda Civic. The marble lobby spoke of old money and established power, the kind of institution that would honor complex international arrangements without asking uncomfortable questions. The banker who met us, a distinguished woman named Patricia Wells, treated our visit with a professional discretion that suggested this was not her first encounter with Chris's planning. Mr. Kellogg, your son prepared thoroughly for this moment. She guided us to a private elevator leading to the safety deposit box vault. The biometric scanners are calibrated specifically for your identification. The vault felt like a fortress. When Patricia opened box 1247, I understood why Chris had chosen that number. It was the same as his house address, where Lorraine now lived in ignorant triumph. Inside lay documents that would change everything. Bank routing numbers for accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Legal papers establishing my sole ownership of assets Lorraine could not imagine, and another video device labeled Final Instructions. I'll give you privacy, Patricia said, withdrawing to the vault entrance. Howard remained beside me as I activated the device. Chris's face appeared again, but this recording felt different, more strategic, less emotional. Dad, if you're watching this, you've accessed the financial protection I created. But money alone won't give you justice. Lorraine destroyed your dignity because she thought you were powerless. Time to prove her wrong. The screen shifted to display photographs and documents I had never seen. Lorraine meeting with divorce lawyers 6 months before my son's death. Financial records showing her attempts to secretly transfer assets. Email communications revealing her true feelings about me. Words so cruel I flinched while reading them. She called you the worthless old burden in correspondence with her lawyer. Chris's voice continued. She said disposing of you would be cleaning house after the funeral. I documented everything, Dad. Every insult, every plan, every moment of calculated cruelty. The evidence was devastating. It was legal proof of premeditation, psychological manipulation, and financial scheming. It was more than enough to destroy her reputation and credibility. Use this information wisely. Lorraine respects only power and fears only exposure. When you're ready to reclaim your dignity, these tools will help you do it properly. The video ended with a final message. You raised me to fight honorably, Dad. Now fight for yourself. We returned to the guest house by noon, my mind spinning with possibilities. Edith took one look at my expression and prepared tea without asking questions. The transformation is remarkable, Howard observed, reviewing the documents at the kitchen table. Yesterday, Lorraine had everything. Today, you hold all the cards, and she doesn't even know the game has changed. That afternoon, I studied every piece of evidence my son had compiled. The pattern was clear. Lorraine had spent 2 years preparing to destroy me the moment Chris died. She had researched nursing homes, investigated ways to declare me incompetent, and even consulted with lawyers about forcing a guardianship. But she had made one crucial error. She had underestimated the depth of a father's love and a son's protective instinct. March 5th passed in strategic preparation. I memorized key financial figures, practiced presenting evidence calmly, and prepared for psychological warfare. Edith helped me rehearse conversations, playing devil's advocate with the sharp intelligence that had clearly influenced her son's legal career. Confidence, Norman, she advised over dinner. Lorraine's weapon was your desperation. Remove that, and she becomes the desperate one. By March 6th, I felt ready. The scared, broken man Lorraine had thrown into the street no longer existed. In his place stood someone with resources, allies, and a plan that would give Lorraine exactly what she had tried to give me: complete powerlessness. Howard called that evening with final arrangements. I've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. I told Stephen we discovered irregularities that required immediate discussion. They'll come expecting to challenge your consultation, and instead, they'll discover that Norman Kellogg has become someone they never anticipated facing. I spent the evening at the guest house writing notes, organizing evidence, and preparing for psychological warfare. Tomorrow would determine whether justice meant anything in a world where cruelty often triumphed over kindness. But tonight, for the first time since my son's death, I felt something stronger than hope. I felt power. The legal papers arrived at the guest house on March 7th, delivered by a process server who apologized for the intrusion. Stephen had filed an incompetency lawsuit, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my financial affairs and needed a court-appointed guardianship. They're desperate, Howard observed, reviewing the documents at Edith's kitchen table. This kind of legal fishing expedition usually backfires spectacularly. The court-ordered psychological evaluation took place 2 days later at Denver General Hospital. Dr. Patricia Martinez, a clinical psychologist with 30 years of experience, conducted comprehensive cognitive testing that lasted 3 hours. Mr. Kellogg demonstrates complete mental competency, she told Howard afterward. He has above-average cognitive function for his age group, excellent memory retention, and superior problem-solving abilities. Whoever suggested incompetency clearly doesn't know this man. While I passed the psychological evaluation with flying colors, Stephen was scouring Denver for witnesses willing to testify against my character. He contacted my former neighbors, Chris's business associates, and even staff at the McDonald's where I had bought cheap meals during my homeless period. Every attempt backfired. Neighbors remembered me as helpful and reliable. Business associates spoke of my pride and care and success and my support during the startup years. Even the McDonald's manager, when approached, defended my dignity during difficult circumstances. Nobody will speak against you, Howard reported with satisfaction. Stephen's fishing expedition caught nothing but community respect. By March 11th, Lorraine's desperation reached a critical level. She called, requesting a private meeting at a coffee shop downtown, claiming she wanted to discuss family matters reasonably. I arrived to find her hunched over an untouched latte, her usual confidence replaced by something approaching panic. She had lost weight since our confrontation at the guest house, and her designer clothes hung awkwardly on her diminished frame. "Norman, we need to talk," she said. Her voice carried none of its earlier authority. "I'm listening. This lawsuit, it's getting expensive. Legal fees are mounting." She leaned forward, desperation poorly disguised as negotiation. "How much do you want? 50,000? 100? Just drop whatever legal challenge you're planning." The offer revealed everything. She suspected I had resources, but she could not imagine their scope. More importantly, she was offering me money that had already been mine, filtered through my son's earnings, built on my initial investment. "You think this is about money, Lorraine?" "Everything's about money." She pulled out her checkbook with shaking hands. "Name your price." 200,000. "I can liquidate some investments." "Keep your money," I said, standing to leave, enjoying the reversal of our power dynamic. "You'll need every penny for what's coming." Her face went pale. "What do you mean, what's coming?" "Justice." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Soon you'll be the one begging, Lorraine, just like you wanted me to do." That afternoon, I visited the bank with Howard and accessed my offshore accounts for the first time. The process was surprisingly simple: a fingerprint scan, retinal identification, and signature verification. Within minutes, I had transferred $200,000 to my local checking account. The bank manager, Patricia Wells, handled the transaction with professional discretion. "Will you be making additional transfers, Mr. Kellogg?" "Eventually, but this amount should handle immediate needs." Driving back to the guest house, Howard could not contain his satisfaction. "She offered you money that was already yours, demanded you drop challenges you haven't even filed, and begged for mercy from someone she threw into the street. The irony is perfect." "Chris would appreciate the justice," I replied. "His plan is working exactly as intended." That evening, Edith served dinner with particular care, celebrating what she recognized as a turning point. "Your son would be proud," she said simply. "You've reclaimed everything she tried to steal." "Not everything," I corrected. "Not yet." Howard's office felt like a courtroom on March 15th. All parties had been summoned for what he termed an urgent legal matter requiring immediate resolution. Lorraine arrived with Stephen, both carrying themselves with a forced confidence that fooled no one. I sat across from them wearing a new suit, not from Goodwill this time, but from Brooks Brothers, purchased with funds that represented just a fraction of my newfound resources. The contrast was deliberate and effective. "We're here to address irregularities in the Kellogg estate," Howard began formally. "Mr. Norman Kellogg has information that requires disclosure under Colorado law." Stephen straightened in his chair. "What irregularities?" "The will was perfectly clear." "The will you read was perfectly clear," I corrected. "But it wasn't complete." I placed a folder on the conference table. Its contents were organized with the precision Chris had taught me in business matters. Bank statements, offshore account documentation, biometric access records, and evidence of a financial structure Lorraine could not have imagined. "Chris predicted your actions, Lorraine. Every move you made, every cruel word you spoke, every plan you hatched, he documented everything." Her face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband spent 2 years watching you prepare to destroy me." I opened the folder, revealing photographs and financial records. "He knew about your meetings with divorce lawyers, your research into nursing homes, and your calculations about eliminating what you called the worthless old burden." Stephen leaned forward, studying the documents with growing alarm. "Where did these come from?" "Chris's private security arrangements," Howard answered. "Completely legal surveillance of his own household and business affairs." Lorraine's hands shook as she reached for the papers. "This is impossible. Chris trusted me completely." "Chris loved you," I corrected. "But love doesn't mean blindness. When he discovered your true nature, he protected himself and his family accordingly." I produced the bank statements, watching her expression shift from confusion to horror as the numbers registered. $8 million in accounts bearing my name and biometric signatures. "Where's the rest of the money?" she whispered. "What rest?" Howard asked innocently. "The estate was worth $16 million. Where's the other $8 million?" The admission hung in the air like a confession. She had known the true value all along. Chris's true estate totaled exactly $16 million, Howard confirmed. You inherited precisely half through legal marriage provisions. The other half belongs to his father through prearranged financial instruments that operate independently of marriage law. Stephen's face went ashen as he understood the implications. Offshore trusts, international banking arrangements, Swiss accounts, Cayman investments, and multiple jurisdiction protections, I explained calmly. All established legally, all accessible only through biometric identification that only I possess. This is fraud, Lorraine screamed. Those assets belong to me. Actually, they never did. Howard produced additional documentation. Chris established these arrangements using personal funds that predated your marriage. The $8 million represents return on investment from his father's original contribution to business startup, plus accumulated interest and strategic growth. I remembered that $15,000 sacrifice that had launched my son's career. My retirement fund given without hesitation to support his dreams. Now it had grown into millions protected by financial planning I could not have imagined. You threw me out believing you had taken everything, I said quietly. But greed made you reveal your true nature to a son who loved his father enough to protect him beyond the grave. Lorraine collapsed into her chair. She had gained $8 million through marriage, but she had lost another $8 million through her cruelty. Simple human decency would have given her access to everything. Now you understand, I concluded. Every dollar you thought you'd stolen through manipulation represents exactly half of what you could have received through simple kindness. Stephen gathered his papers with shaking hands. His professional reputation was in ruins. Howard's superior legal strategy had made him look like an amateur. Justice sometimes comes late, Howard observed with satisfaction. But it comes. April brought Denver's transformation from winter bleakness to spring possibility, mirroring my own rebirth. I spent the first week house hunting in Washington Park, one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods, guided by a realtor who treated my financial credentials with respectful professionalism. The Victorian mansion I chose sat on a corner lot lined with century-old elm trees. Its wraparound porch and bay windows spoke of established dignity. At $800,000, it cost exactly what Chris's house had been worth. The house where Lorraine now struggled with mounting mortgage payments and declining property values. Congratulations, Mr. Kellogg, the realtor said as we finalized the purchase. You'll be very happy here. Moving day required professional services to transport belongings I had accumulated during weeks of careful shopping. Furniture that reflected taste rather than necessity, and artwork that brought joy rather than filling space. My home office was equipped for managing investments rather than searching for survival. Edith visited during the settling process, her delight evident as she toured the rooms that showcased financial security and personal dignity. Chris would be so proud, she said, admiring the library where his business books now shared shelves with volumes I had always wanted to read. He made this possible, I replied. Every comfort, every security, every moment of peace. It's his gift to me. Meanwhile, Lorraine's world collapsed with a systematic precision. The house in Cherry Creek went on the market at a reduced price, financial pressures forcing a quick sale that would barely cover mounting debts. Stephen's aggressive legal tactics had backfired so spectacularly that his reputation suffered permanent damage. Other clients were questioning his competence. Howard visited my new home regularly, ostensibly for legal consultations, but actually for a friendship that had grown from professional obligation. Justice has a beautiful symmetry, he observed one afternoon as we shared coffee in my living room. She gets exactly what she tried to give you. Homelessness, financial insecurity, and social isolation. Natural consequences, I corrected. I didn't cause her downfall. Her own choices did. The final encounter came in late April. A chance meeting outside the courthouse where Lorraine was filing bankruptcy papers. She looked haggard, her designer clothes replaced by discount store alternatives, her confidence destroyed by circumstances she had created through her own cruelty. Norman, please, she approached hesitantly, desperation replacing the arrogance I remembered. I know I made mistakes, but I need help. Just temporary assistance until I get back on my feet. The role reversal was complete. 3 months ago, I had been the one begging for mercy. pleading for basic human compassion from someone who had responded with calculated cruelty. Now, she stood in that position, asking for the kindness she had refused to show. Learn to survive on your own, Lorraine. I used her exact words from that February afternoon, delivered without malice, but with a complete finality. Figure it out like everyone else does. Her face crumpled as she recognized the echo of her own cruelty returned with interest. But I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only a sense of completion from a justice that had taken its natural course. That evening, I visited Chris's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone bore a simple inscription, "Beloved son and father," words that captured the love that had motivated everything. Justice has prevailed, I said quietly, placing fresh flowers beside the marker. Your plan worked perfectly, son. Your father is safe, and the woman who tried to destroy him learned that greed costs more than generosity ever could. A spring wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of new growth and fresh possibilities. Standing in my expensive coat beside my luxury car, financially secure for the rest of my life, I understood that the greatest victory was not the wealth I had accumulated, but the dignity I had restored. My son's love had reached beyond death to transform me from victim to victor, proving that family loyalty transcends even the grave when expressed through sophisticated planning and unwavering protection.